everyone. Hello to everybody here in Punta del Este in Uruguay and to everybody who's watching us around the world. Thank you so much for joining this session. Journalism is a public good. Our journalists, our freedom. I'm Liz Corbin. I'm a Deputy Media Director and Head of News at the European Broadcasting Union. We represent more than 100 public service media organisations. And for the next hour, we're going to be touring the globe, hearing some amazing stories of public service journalists. They're going to be sharing their concrete examples of how independent reporting is a public good and how they deal with the increasing threats that they face. So, may I introduce my panel. Joining me live for this session today, from Kyiv in Ukraine, Angelina Kariaquino. She is the head of news at UAPBC, the public broadcaster. Ging Reyes is Senior Vice President News at ABS-CBN from Manila in the Philippines. Here with me in Punta del Este is Yolanda Lopez, the Acting Director of Voice of America. From Miami, Oswaldo Quintana Cardona, the Chief Executive of Radio Caracas Televisión. And John Williams, who's the Director of News at the Irish national broadcaster RTE, who's in Dublin today. I can't wait for them to share their stories with you. But first, as an introduction to this session, the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Global Communications, Melissa Fleming, has recorded her thoughts on press freedom and why journalists play a critical role in ensuring the integrity of public information.
Hello, everyone. I am pleased to be with you today at this global conference for the celebration of World Press Freedom Day. As someone with a background in journalism and a career devoted to communications, the cause of press freedom is very close to my heart. Despite the progress made in ensuring press freedom, journalism still faces a multitude of threats: censorship, intimidation, and physical attacks against the lives and livelihoods of journalists and other media workers persist up to this day. In the last few years, we also live in an increasingly polluted information environment, which makes all other challenges for journalists even more acute. We see a range of bad actors exploiting the sincere demand for information on issues ranging from COVID-19 to climate change or the war in Ukraine. They circulate false, misleading, or distorted content to warp our understanding of events, and they're getting millions of views. Some of these mis- and disinformation actors aim to create confusion and a state of information paralysis. Others are just exploiting public sympathies for financial gain. This makes it even harder for media to unearth and unveil the truth. At a recent study among journalists conducted by PEN America, virtually all responders said that disinformation has a deep impact on their work. About half of these journalists felt frustrated or overwhelmed. Over 40% felt that a portion of their audience had lost trust in them. Crucially, 3 out of 5 journalists said that amid the proliferation of disinformation and distrust, they had received threatening messages and they had been harassed in person while working. They had been trolled or catfished, or they feared for their personal safety in such a scale to add security precautions to their daily routines. In this framework of insecurity, women media workers are particularly vulnerable as they are targeted online significantly more than their male colleagues. This results in their voice being silenced, their journalistic work interrupted, and the media landscape overall becoming poorer, more unequal, and much less diverse. In this and many other ways, mis- and disinformation acts as a catalyst for exacerbating the worst problems in society. It contributes to a break in trust. It distorts the public debate. It even brings the notions of objectivity and truth into question. As the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has said, the ability to cause large-scale disinformation and undermine scientifically established facts is an existential risk to humanity. The problem is more severe in the digital realm. Without a doubt, digital platforms have proven to be invaluable tools in our lives. They connect us when we are forced to distance, and they bring us close to events as they unfold in real time. They are the medium of information. But as useful as they are, digital platforms were not designed to keep us informed, but engaged. Amplified by algorithms designed to grab attention, it is the most provocative and outrageous posts that rise to the top of our feeds, very often including false or misleading claims. Yet, they can still serve humanity's best interests for peace, dignity, and the rule of law. This is our vision at the United Nations. We want to ensure that the digital public square is inclusive and safe for all, and that our digital commons are managed as a global public good. To this goal, my team at the Department of Global Communications is working to develop a code of conduct for integrity in public information. We are just beginning this process, and we will consult a wide range of stakeholders around the world. On this note, I would like to commend the European Broadcasting Union for consistently calling for action to ensure integrity in public information, too. In the global information war, we can all be online peacekeepers. Therefore, and before I conclude, please allow me also to take this opportunity to express our solidarity with journalists and media workers, to confirm that we will never forget the sacrifices that are being made by journalists everywhere, today and every day, to deliver accurate and transparent information about the world we live in. Happy World Press Freedom Day, and thank you. I wish you an engaging and dynamic discussion.
Thanks to Melissa Fleming from the UN for that, those encouraging and powerful comments. There are few people in the world today who really understand about the sacrifices that journalists are making to deliver accurate and transparent information. Some people, perhaps watching now, perhaps in the past, can imagine what it's like to cover an atrocious war in your own country. So our next speaker, Angelina Kariaquino, who's head of news at the Ukrainian public broadcaster UAPBC, has, together with her team, put together the next video to share with you their thoughts about World Press Freedom Day. If we could have the next video.
Тихо, 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 это выход. Вот так мы каждый день. Просто. Оце у нас горщик.
Я не фотографії покажу.
Нема больше Лизы. И шарнелью сердце в щечку, ножку оторвал.
Продовжується наш національний телемарафон.
ми тримаємо інформаційний фронт для того, щоб ви могли знати більше.
Angelina, thanks for joining us from Kyiv so late in the evening, and thank you for that video to give us all an insight about what your teams have been doing these past few months. Such a difference from how you were working before. Can you tell us, really practically speaking, how you've managed your news teams and what they're facing and how they're managing to get the output out?
Hello everyone, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone. I'd like actually to start by thanking all the journalists who are working today in Ukraine, Ukrainian journalists, foreign journalists, and to point out that for the past 70 days of this full-out Russian invasion into Ukraine, 22 of our colleagues were killed and 15, including our colleague in Mariupol, went missing. So journalists, along with other representatives of civil society and local authorities, are the targets in this war. I also wanted to give out some very important information for everyone to share. Over a dozen of TV towers were attacked in Ukraine during this 70 days. Multiple websites suffered heavy cyber attacks, including the website of the Ukrainian public broadcaster. We were lucky to survive, and I have to say we were able to survive thanks to enormous support of a number of our partners and friends, in particular European Broadcasting Union. So thank you for that. Dozens of lives across the whole country were lost today as we speak. It seems like just a normal sunny May day, but dozens of lives were lost, including 21, just 21 of them only in Donetsk region. As we speak, the Russian assault of Azovstal, it's a plant in Mariupol where many find refuge, is in progress, literally as we speak. Colleagues paid their last tributes to a journalist whose name is Vera Hirich. She was killed several days ago in Kiev by a Russian rocket in her apartment today. And just a couple of hours ago, just before this conversation with you, we received reports about attacks in Lviv, Vinnytsia, Odessa, Kyiv, Kropivnitsky. They were attacked by Russian missiles. The number of killed and injured is still to be confirmed. So this is how this day, the World Press Freedom Day, looks for us today as we speak. Let me get to the Ukrainian public broadcaster. So just for you to understand, it includes national and regional television, it includes radio stations and digital platforms. Our viewership indeed, especially audience in social media, skyrocketed over these 2 months, proving that people critically need information that they can really trust. I don't know, it's probably something like an anecdote for many, but we argued that the public broadcaster in Ukraine is something like an ambulance. You probably don't need it each day, but when you really need it, it has to operate properly, it has to work properly. So let me just focus on the things that we were able to establish while doing what we were supposed to do. Work in the field, talk to people and verify information. These are the insights that I have to share with you, the insights of our team that I have to share with you from working from the field. So all-out invasion is a huge challenge in terms of coverage for a country like Ukraine. It is one of the biggest countries in Europe, so you can imagine when on the 24th of February, when multiple cities were attacked at the same time. Probably there were many journalists, editors, and producers among this audience. You can imagine a challenge that you face. You pick up the phone and you really need to prioritize whom you call. You call Kharkiv, you call Sumy, Donbass, or Bucha, Irpin. So it was just a really huge challenge for us. But I don't know, paradoxically, or it was just a good calculation, we were lucky, and we're still lucky to have the strongest teams in the most affected regions. So while we were working with, one region, while we were working with one team, another team was able to, proceed with work. Some of the broadcasting operations were stopped temporarily, but all of the teams, remained in places, and most of them remain, as you could see in the video, working from the field. You didn't need like a second to make, to put another task for them to command them to do something. The majority of our colleagues just stayed in places, and it is still even hard to get them out to have a few days of rest. They just feel that they need to be where they are. I wanted to share with you some of the experiences which are particularly hard to share, but it is important for me to emphasize that war crimes in Ukraine amounted to unspeakable cruelty. It is repeated rape, it is torture, executions, looting, and it is something that we established working in the field, talking to people. I've heard multiple times that there is so much information from Ukraine. There are so many news, so many tweets, so many reports, that sometimes it is hard to double check or to trust something. One of my British colleagues actually shared one of my Facebook posts saying, listen guys, he's a journalist himself. Listen guys, this is a journalist from Ukraine you can trust. I know that many find it hard to trust information coming from Ukraine. It was weird for me, but to a certain extent, I can understand colleagues when, in Europe in 2022, you get reports like that. So we had to establish a team, a verification team. We were lucky to have as partners our friends from an organization called Vox Check Ukraine. And whenever we needed, to double check metadata or, satellite images or just the sources of information, to take a deeper look at the images, videos, and photos, we were able to work together. And this joint work, this partnership actually helped us establish several incredible cases in terms of cruelty and killings of civilians. For example, in Bucha, we were able to establish that a civilian was killed in Bucha by a Russian military vehicle. We were able to see that it was a drone footage. Probably you've seen it in a story from New York Times and CNN as well. They picked up the story and they also developed it into a full investigation. So we were able, thanks to this cooperation, to establish that this is a footage that was really shot in the beginning of March. This is really Bucha. These are really Russian military vehicles, and this is really a civilian riding a bicycle, which was a woman that was shot. Probably you've also seen these pictures. It's a woman with wonderful red manicure. This picture went out there throughout the world. So this is something that we were able to establish. We were also able to realize and share probably with the world that occupation, the Russian occupation, brings direct life threat. There's a discussion out there, and I've seen it in, for example, in German media, asking why Ukrainians are fighting for cities like Mariupol. Why wouldn't they just surrender so the civilians who are staying in this village would survive, But from what we've seen in Bucha, cities that didn't surrender, but the Russian troops entered these cities, we could actually see what was happening. Just indiscriminate fire, executions, tortures, and repeated rape in the occupied territories. This is why it is so critically important for Ukraine to fight and to protect the cities and not let the occupation. While the occupation is in progress, what we were also able to establish, thanks to our teams who are working under the occupation, unfortunately undercover, because it's a huge threat for them. There are lists of journalists, of activists, of local authorities, of war veterans, anti-corruption activists, list that the Russian troops have with them as they enter the cities. It means that the offices and apartments and homes of the people who are living in the cities and villages are, under direct threat, under the focus of the Russian troops, and this is why it is important for people to save their lives and either stay undercover, because many of them, in principle, they don't want to leave their hometowns, and waiting till the situation is resolved, until Ukraine comes back there. The Ukrainian government comes back in these cities.
Angelina, if I could just ask you a question. Sorry, you gave some really great examples, and they're just perhaps two examples of the huge benefits that all of the journalists that have been reporting on Ukraine have had from the work that you guys are doing on the ground. And I just want to say thank you for that, for everybody who has benefited from the work that you're doing. And although there has been, it's important to point out that there have been some restrictions imposed by the Ukrainian government under which you're working. The work of the public broadcaster really, I remember a conversation I had with you quite early on, where you were having serious editorial discussions about how to maintain impartiality and independence, and how important that was to you and your colleagues in really difficult circumstances. But not only that, I also want to pick up on something you've also, before all of this began, were a co-founder of the Laboratory for Public Interest Journalism in Ukraine. And innovation and reaching audiences with news is really at your heart, and you've continued to do that through this period. And I wonder if you can give us some examples of how you've been innovating in these very difficult circumstances.
One of our dilemmas, of course, was before the war, and not before the war, but before the full-out invasion, because the war was started in 2014, and there's a longer story. I will come back to this point later. Was a dilemma how to reach our audience, how to engage our audiences, especially with the journalism of public interest, which seems to be declining, in the era of digital platforms, bloggers, TikTok, and so on and so forth. So we were able, together with the team at the laboratory, to establish a number of practices that we actually started to put in place before the invasion, before the 24th of February, and we were able to see that it really works, engaging our audiences by asking them and including them in editorial process, be it, an editorial meeting in the morning, asking, what stories do you think we're missing today, for example, in a regional outlet somewhere in northern Ukraine, or for example, having town hall meetings or having questionnaires, making our audience feel that they are part of the story, that we are not just, working in somewhere in vacuum just for ourselves and for other journalists. It's something that we feel is still necessary, reaching out to people and giving them this feeling that their voices really matter, not just by the fact that we give them the mic, but also by the fact that they are included in some editorial practices. It's really important to point out, and it really played out well in regional newsrooms, because the regional TV stations, the regional newsrooms are, the most closest allies of the regional audiences, so to say. This is how they were able to produce lots of stories about infrastructure, about problems in healthcare, education, science on the local level, and to see what solutions could be found within these problems. But yeah, okay, I'll get back later to another point which I really wanted to share with you. It's apart from the fact I already mentioned stories of the war crimes, tragedies, and losses, but also it is really important for foreign media to see, and I think it's really out there, that Ukraine also provides an example of incredible solidarity, unification, and humanity across the whole country. I will get back to it later, but it was really important for me to mention.
Thank you. Yes, we will do that, Angelina, and I'm sure many of you watching or here in the audience may have questions for Angelina or any of our speakers, and I encourage you to, whether you're watching on the platform or wherever you're watching, to make those comments, and we'll try to get those to the speakers as well, and we'll come back later. But let's go to Manila in the Philippines. A very early good morning to Ging Reyes there. Thank you so much, Ging, for being up and about at this hour. You work for ABS-CBN, an organisation which knows firsthand very recently about direct political pressure. It's been 2 years since you had to stop your regular operations after a politically motivated decision to remove your broadcast, not to renew your broadcast licence. And just this week, the Filipino president said, despite evidence to the contrary, that your organisation was not paying its taxes, that it shouldn't resume regular operations as a result of that he was asking the military and the police to monitor you. And most extraordinarily, he advocated for the bombing of ABS-CBN. An absolutely appalling situation. Ging, how do you operate in these circumstances?
Good morning from Manila, and thank you, Liz. I am very privileged to be part of this conversation. How are we dealing with this kind of hostile environment, if you will, in the Philippines? Well, it's been 2 years, as you said, since our broadcast operations were shut down. We have let go of thousands of employees. Our reach has diminished. Our resources are very limited, and this is very notable, especially since we are covering a presidential election next week. On Monday, this country is electing a new president and a set of senators, congressmen, governors, mayors. It's a general election. But I think the real deeper impact of the shutdown of our network was the drop in television viewership. And to us, it's alarming because TV is still the main source of news and information for our people, even if internet penetration has vastly improved. And late last year, a survey was conducted in our country where it was found that almost half of the population believe that it's dangerous to print or broadcast reports critical of the administration. It's been very challenging, and press freedom and our role in society has taken on a more significant meaning for us in ABS-CBN following our shutdown and the rejection of our license, of our application for a broadcast license in 2020. Without that free and far-reaching platform, our teams have been relying on digital alternatives to bring factual reporting to the news audience. And it hasn't been easy because the digital platform is rife with lies and falsehoods and all sorts of disinformation. Filipinos are among the world's top users of Facebook. And this makes our job extremely difficult. Our journalists are subject to bashing and trolling and hate messages and threats even. But we know that we cannot give up. We know that we have to continue doing our job, performing our role as truth tellers in the face of this polluted information environment, especially in a country that's in the middle of an election campaign, a very, very competitive, I would say, election campaign. But I think a bigger challenge is for us, and not just for ABS-CBN, but for all journalists, is our effort to help the public understand that media freedom or press freedom is essential in the system of checks and balances in any country. And that when we fulfill our role as monitors of power, there's bound to be friction, especially with those who we have to hold to account. And that has increasingly been underappreciated and misunderstood by a lot of people these days, because there are a lot of noise. There's just a lot of noise in social media. The state uses social media to propagate its own agenda too, and to discredit journalists and professional media practitioners. And that is a big challenge. We need to be able to relate media freedom to the everyday lives of our audience. It's very moving to see, our regional journalists, just to share an example, who lost their jobs due to our shutdown, but still working on their own to provide news to their communities in different provinces in the country. When we cover typhoons in remote areas in the Philippines, our reporters are given or are afforded that opportunity to reconnect with some of our audience who felt deprived of relevant information when our free-to-air broadcast was cut off. It's very common for us to hear complaints and observations that they weren't able to hear or see or watch any warnings about an oncoming typhoon, or to be given adequate warnings about an impending an important event in their communities, especially those in remote areas. So that's our dilemma, and that's our challenges, part of our challenges at the moment. But of course, we still have to do our jobs. It is difficult, of course, but we have to keep on fighting. Whenever I watch reports from Ukraine, I can't help but feel that we are still fortunate that we are not covering a war. But of course, it is a different kind of war for all of us that's still raging. It's the war against truth, and we are the warriors that are fighting to make sure that the truth is not buried, that the truth is not distorted, that facts are accessible to everyone to our audiences all over the world.
Ging, thanks for you and all of your teams for everything that you're doing to keep going in those situations. And you're a manager of people, and it's been a very difficult time. But what do you say to those journalists who are frightened about going out to report on a story, or are worried about what the implications might be if their name is put on a story? How do you manage that?
Liz, it's an everyday battle, to be completely candid about it. There was a chilling effect after our shutdown, and some of our journalists really sometimes had to, sort of practice self-censorship even. They would always be very cautious about, putting out a particular story that is critical to the administration or to certain personalities, certain politicians. We always have to weigh everything now against the need for the public to know, as well as we have to make sure that our facts are unassailable all the time. In a way, it's also good because it makes us more aware of our role to be and the need for accuracy and fairness. But it is bad because the fear is there. We want to claim, we want to say that we're brave about this, that we're being courageous. But really, I think being courageous is just really working through your fears and overcoming it on a daily basis, faced with stories that are usually difficult also to put together because of access to information, access to documents, for instance. They used to be, government agencies used to be more open to requests for documents, for instance. Now it would take a little bit more time and a greater effort to secure research documents, for instance. And there would be times when a person is, or a particular office isn't reported in a favorable manner, and you'd have difficulty just getting access or getting a comment from that particular agency. So it's a daily battle for us.
Thank you, Ging. Thank you for that insight. Now, there aren't many news organizations that can boast of broadcasting in 47 languages, reaching hundreds of millions of people every week. Voice of America celebrates 80 years this week. Congratulations to Acting Director Yolanda Lopez on your anniversary. It's probably accurate to say that where there is conflict, there is Voice of America. So this is part of your bread and butter work, working in places where journalists are put under pressure. How are you experiencing press freedom today?
Hi, thank you very much for having me. First of all, I want to say happy Press Freedom Day to all of you. I'm deeply moved by the stories of my colleagues. Yeah, Voice of America has been reporting the news from the United States and also around the world for 80 years. Because most of the content we delivered is delivered in countries where there is lack of press freedom. We are used, you know, unfortunately, to this kind of scenarios. I always say, so we were in Afghanistan when the Kabul fell, and all the international media went there. We obviously also were there, but we had, you know, an Afghan service for years covering Afghanistan, or we have a very vibrant Ukrainian service, Russian service, Vietnamese, Chinese branch. So. And obviously Spanish service as well that covers Latin America. So in some of these areas, when you know, there is a breaking news, we always say, you know, Voice of America was there before, and then when the news cycle eventually fades, Voice of America continues being there, because that's our commitment. Unfortunately, what Angelina was describing from Ukraine is a story that I've heard from my fellow journalists in Voice of America in other countries in the world. Obviously, what is going on right now in Ukraine is very dramatic. But we saw the images also in Afghanistan with the evacuation of when people wanted to flee. We saw those images, you know, people running and trying to get into evacuation planes, and what happened afterwards. We have seen the atrocities also in Ethiopia. So we have seen the coup in Myanmar. You know, it is very common for Voice of America journalists to be in those situations. And when we cover those stories, we also feel, you know, the impact that it has in the journalists as well. Not only because of the journalists that go in and they are able to leave because they're just covering the story, and then they can file the story from another country safely doing so. But you know, there is trauma for them for what they have seen, obviously, especially the ones that cover war zones. But then we have the local stringers, the local journalists, like our colleagues, very brave colleagues here, have described the work of you know, reporting on your own country while this country is at war. And then we have the colleagues in Washington, D.C. In the case of the Voice of America, Washington, D.C. is where we had our headquarters, and we have the language services. With right now, for instance, we have, like I said, a vibrant, very dynamic, brave Ukrainian service and Russian service as well in Voice of America in D.C., covering the war from far away. That is very challenging as well because they are seeing what is happening in their own countries, and they are reporting on events that are happening to their families, friends as well, that they are living there. The same happening in Afghanistan with our Afghan service. And they were reporting on events that were happening in Afghanistan, and some of them, because of the work they do for the Voice of America, their families and friends are in danger in those countries. So there is a lot of ways in which journalists are threatened or felt that they're intimidated and that they don't feel safe. And I'm very proud and humbled that I can lead an organization full of journalists that are so brave and so committed on telling the story, right? To tell those stories and to tell the truth, and hopefully make a difference and make sure that those stories are told. And like Angelina said, that those images and from Bucha and those stories that we tell the world that is happening and that is real.
Let's take a look at some of the work of your journalists around the world. Have the next video.
Always part of the equation when I planned my reporting trips to Afghanistan. Now, under Taliban rule, press freedom is truly threatened.
Previously, we were allowed to go freely anywhere to report, but not anymore. For example, some ministries and offices don't allow women to come inside.
This footage, shot in the Ukrainian city of Irpin in early March, is becoming a common scene in a war.
This is Bucha in Ukraine.
Many of our VOA brave colleagues are risking their lives working to document the brutalities of the Russian army. At least 7 journalists, Ukrainian and foreign correspondents, have been killed while on the job.
Russian journalists right now live in a situation of wartime censorship. They can't even say the words war or invasion describing what's going on. They can't say the truth. Otherwise, they will face persecution after 15 years jail time.
At least 150 Russian journalists have left the country since its invasion of Ukraine.
Every 12 hours, a Mexican journalist is threatened.
Crime reporter Jesus Humberto Gonzalez was on assignment covering the discovery of dismembered bodies in a parking lot.
At least 4 vehicles with armed people kidnapped me, took me to a cliff, put a gun to my head, and literally pulled the trigger.
The press freedom in Hong Kong is going downhill for the past 2 years, especially the regime introduced the national security law.
First of all, in June 2021 was Apple Daily and its founder Jimmy Lai. In late December, National Security Police raided the pro-democracy news website Stand News. Lai, an outspoken critic of the Chinese Communist Party, is now in prison.
We, as a VOA reporter, also have a problem that when we try to interview some people, they are worried to speak to us. Our journalists cannot use our own name because they are also concerned their own safety.
Last year in February, when the Myanmar military coup happened, our colleague, a VOA Burmese local journalist, was shot with rubber bullets while trying to cover a street protest.
Wherever you go, you'll see that people are kind of following, people trying to understand what you're doing, and you don't know who are these guys. And knowing the history of Mozambique, there have been a lot of issues with journalists, so I felt kind of insecure. But that also gave me a vibe to continue doing what I wanted to do.
My name is Masih Alinejad. I'm an Iranian journalist who was forced to live in exile in America. The Iranian regime did everything to break me, to keep me silent. I received daily death threats. Every day I faced online harassment just because of being a journalist.
So many different examples. And one of the things I think you wanted to reflect on today is the wide variety of different pressures that they face, from Mozambique to Myanmar to Hong Kong, China.
Yeah, that's what we see. Like I said, our journalists, journalists around the world, is obviously war is one of the obvious ones. Violence is one of the obvious ones, but also threatening you in so many ways, like threatening your family. Right, it's also a way to silence journalists, and also governments, like the example of our colleague in the Philippines with these laws and regulations, and some other means suffocating media with maybe not putting advertising in these media outlets. So many ways in which media can be silenced, and the thing also, like we said in the video. It's not only about the journalists that sometimes you exercise self-censor because you are just afraid, rightfully so, but also because you need to work and you need to earn a living as well, and because your family is also in danger. So
but sometimes it's genuinely too dangerous, isn't it, to report on a story? And you must have conversations like that with your journalists all the time. And tell us what happens when you have those conversations.
Well, so I have, it depends, right? For the journalists, the one example that I always like to tell is about these journalists that wanted to cover Syria and Iraq during the pandemic. And obviously during the pandemic, because a lot of countries were in lockdown and didn't feel safe for her to travel. We were very reluctant, and she asked me the question that I'm always asking each time now. I want to decide if someone can go to a place, especially obviously if it is a dangerous place. It is we don't go, who is gonna tell the story? And you weighing, the safety issues and the need to tell the story. And I'm assuming that our colleagues in Ukraine right now is what they are asking themselves. If we don't tell the story, who is going to tell that story? So they need to be there. This commitment that journalists have, and obviously we as news organizations, as editors and managers, we have to support. But also, then for the local journalists, there is many ways in which we can tell the story, because obviously Voice of America have been reporting on Iran, on North Korea, on China, and obviously we don't have people there like reporting on the ground, but do we have in some places people that can report or can share information and safely, and obviously we don't put their names, we report on their behalf. One of the things that Voice of America does in some countries is to act like the local media. So if the local media or some journalists are afraid or are intimidated to tell a story, we will tell that story for them, and we will collaborate. And we are doing that all over the world, telling those stories that we feel safer to do it because someone is reporting on that story from DC. So it is safer for them. But obviously, a lot of our sources and great stories come from the ground, and that is where the danger really relies.
But getting creative to get around those problems is absolutely key. And our next speaker knows this extremely well. Oswaldo Quintana Cardona is the chief executive for Radio Caracas Televisión. He joins us from Miami, not from Venezuela. He and the team were forced to leave in 2007, as many of you here in Latin America will know well. The government shut their station down, but they continue to operate. Oswaldo, please share with us on a really practical level, how do you do that? How do you cover your country when it's so difficult for you to do so?
Well, I would like to thank UNESCO, the European Broadcasting Union, and the International Association of Broadcasting for organizing this panel and for inviting us to participate. Special thanks to Nicola Frank and Liz Corbin for the coordination of this meeting. Beyond the greatest changes that have occurred in the last 20 years, mainly in the technological field, freedom of speech continues to be one of the most important human rights and a fundamental tenet or principle of any society that most of us will find minimally acceptable. The news that we all watch daily remind us of the dangers to which journalists are exposed. Most of those risks are obvious to everyone and have been discussed already in this panel. Nevertheless, there are new threats to journalists, more sophisticated ways to attack journalists in order to persuade them not to tell the truth, and thus limit the full exercise of the right to freedom of speech. In the last years, the development of the media and our societies are impressive, and indeed, the ways used to attack journalists are also in evolution. Therefore, I am going to address the indirect methods or means that are used by some governments, for instance, in Venezuela, Argentina, Ecuador, we will see some examples, that are used also by power groups and by mafias to keep journalists and media silent. But first, it is important to mention the legal framework that gives us the appropriate legal base in order to analyze this issue. Section 3 of Article 13 of the American Convention on Human Rights. In addition, addressing this matter, there are important reports from both the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the Office of the Special Rapporteur for the Freedom of Expression of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Moreover, there are relevant sentences and rulings from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights as well.
Oswaldo, you are a director of the International Association of Broadcasters, a union like mine that brings together broadcasters to share expertise and to speak together on issues. How important is that unity in face of all of the challenges that you've just described? Oswaldo might.
Yes.
Are you hearing me? Did you hear my question?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, now.
I was saying that you're a member of the International Association of Broadcasters. You're part of that organisation as a director. It's a union that brings broadcasters together. How important is that unity that we as journalists and news organisations stick together to face the challenges that you describe?
Well, it is paramount for media and for the journalists to be together, working against all these threats and risks that we are facing every day, especially in South America, where we are facing these new methods, these new means to attack the journalists and the media. The International Association of Broadcasters have done a great job helping us, counseling us, and being with us in this path, which has been very, very hard, very difficult in the last years. As you know, RCTV was shut down by the Venezuelan government in 2007, arguing that the license expired, but that is also this kind of new threats that we are facing right now. I would like to briefly mention several examples using 5 categories, very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we are running out of time, Oswaldo. Thank you.
Yes. Well, first, some governments are using public officers or administrative services to threat journalists and media. For instance, the office responsible for collecting taxes is used in some countries in Latin America to open tax investigations against independent journalists and media. Offices or public entities in charge of the radioelectric spectrum are used to open legal processes for suspension of concession for private television channel, as we just heard from the Filipinos. Also, they are used to establish excessive controls and complex administrative processes to renew the authorization to operate radio and television stations. In some Latin American countries, the mechanism to, for instance, to issue a visa or an ID to our journalists have been used against the journalists and the media with the excuse that it is necessary to apply legal regulation on immigration. Second, there are some judicial attacks and threats. In some countries where separation of powers does not exist in principle or in facto, and the government controls the legal courts, the courts are used to open trials and summary proceedings against journalists and media. Lawsuits for defamation against journalists and media are increasingly in Latin America. The lack of impartiality of the courts has become widely used as a method or means to threat journalists. Another example, legislative attacks and threats. Some states in Latin America are using the legislative branch to establish some new laws that seek to create difficulties to journalism. According to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, for example, las leyes de desacato, as we call them in Spanish, are contemplated in several criminal laws in Latin America. Those establish a criminal sanction for offenses made by a journalist against a public official regarding the performance of her duties. This crime supposes, therefore, that the entire state repressive system is activated, especially to sanction those journalists who criticize public officials in Latin America. This means is clearly contrary to the democratic principles of control of those who exercise the powers. Another example, very quickly, for instance, foreign exchange controls, which are forms of control imposed by the government on the purchase or sale of foreign currency, is also used as a resource to threat media and journalists because it denies access to the currencies necessary for their operation. Moreover, some governments use the antitrust commission or entities that deal with antitrust law in order to threat media and organizations. We saw that especially in Argentina in the past years. Last, we have seen how some states, especially in South America, power groups and mafias have been using the methods or means of recording private telephone conversations that are later used to blackmail journalists. In summary, all of these methods or means are used directly against the journalists or in many cases used against the media in which the journalists are working. For that reason, following your question, and answer your question. For that reason, it's very, very important that we work together. Journalists, the media, and the organization, for instance, as the European Broadcasting Union, the International Association of Broadcasting, who are working with us in all these legal issues that are using against the journalism in these days.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Oswaldo. That's great. What a depressing and challenging list that you gave us, but so much work to do, and as you say, unity and solidarity is so crucial. Our final panelist today has worked around the world, heading up foreign news operations at the BBC, at ABC in the US, and he's now the Director of News and Current Affairs at the Irish public broadcaster RTE. He also sits on the board of the non-profit Committee for the Protection of Journalists. John Williams, there's probably not a conflict or politically challenging story that you have not in some way been part of in the past 20 years. So having listened to all of our other colleagues here today, what are your reflections on the future of press freedom, and what's inspiring you?
My colleagues, bluntly, there could be no better advert to be a journalist than this last hour. You know, from the courage of Angelina's journalists in Ukraine, and how great it is to see you, Angelina, to the bravery of Ging and the team in the Philippines, to VOA right around the world. This is a fantastic profession, and we are privileged to share it with such courageous colleagues. And while today is about focusing on press freedom, it's also about celebrating journalism. And we heard from Oswaldo about the importance of keeping journalism alive when you can no longer practice journalism in your home country. And we heard from about the VOA journalists who had to leave Afghanistan after the drawdown there last August. You know, I'm incredibly proud that Ireland stepped up and gave sanctuary to journalists from Afghanistan, and many of them are continuing to practice their journalism here. There is no point in journalists leaving a country and coming to drive a cab in New York. We want them to continue to be journalists. That's the way that we make sure that there isn't another 9/11, that Afghanistan doesn't become North Korea. So yes, it is incredibly depressing, and it is terrifying, the risks that some of our colleagues face. But how privileged are we to work in a career that we share with so many unbelievably courageous individuals.
Thank you, John. You always put so eloquently what everybody in the room is feeling. Thank you. You're based in Europe, where the European Union has been doing a lot of work on this level of media freedom, but also regulation, particularly of digital services. It's been talked a lot about here in Uruguay the past 2 days. How do you feel about how regulation and intervention of governments and authorities is necessary to protect journalists? Is enough being done? Is too much being done? How would you reflect on that?
Look, let's be clear, not enough is being done. And you know, for a long time sitting here in Europe, threats to press freedom were things that happened far away. The pandemic showed that actually threats for press freedom are not just happening around the world, they're happening around the corner, where people are trying to delegitimize fact-based journalism. And so whether it's with the initiative, the Journalism Trust Initiative that the EBU and Reporters Without Borders have pioneered, which is essentially a European standard for trusted journalism, that hopefully the European Union will then put pressure on the platforms to actually promote in terms of their algorithms, to make sure that actually the audience have a better chance of identifying what is and what is not trusted journalism. But, you know, we have to get away from this lie that, you know, the platforms are not publishers. I'm afraid when they are publishing content that is factually wrong and is dangerous, they need to be held account. We are held to account quite rightly as journalists if we publish things that are inaccurate, and we can be taken to court, we can go to jail if necessary. The same needs to be true of others. And, you know, I welcome any attempt to actually make sure that actually everybody matches the standards of journalism and journalists on World Press Freedom Day.
Now, John, I'm going to take the opportunity of you being on this panel today to share something that we're doing together. RTE is part of an EBU initiative, a pilot project, which has 10 broadcasters sharing their online news content. We have for 60 years shared our linear video content, but the challenge now is to make sure more audiences can see more of the content that we produce, and RTE is part of that. I'm going to ask you a little bit about what the difference that's making to your RTE, John, but let's have the video first to explain a little of how it works.
Together, public service media make up Europe's largest newsroom. They invest 5.5 billion euros a year and employ more than 40,000 journalists to deliver independent, trusted news every second of every day. And now, they're driving a unique editorial and technical collaboration, a European perspective, harnessing the scale and power of EBU members. A European perspective brings online audiences the best journalism in their own languages. Together, we're throwing light on the issues affecting all European citizens and putting our own journalism into perspective by seeing how those issues are reported elsewhere. In a world of information overload and language barriers, each editor recommends their best stories to their counterparts in other countries. This is made possible by a state-of-the-art software platform using the latest machine learning. It's powered by Peach, the EBU's personalization and recommendation system, and Eurovox for transcribing, translating, revoicing and subtitling multilingual content. Text, video and audio news, all translated into several different languages. A European perspective is embedded directly into members' own websites. It will enable us to build a culture of mutual understanding, helping to inform the public by guiding them to trusted news sources and countering disinformation. By innovating together at EBU Brussels, we can create a truly European perspective.
So that's roughly how it works. If you want to go and try it out for yourself, you can go to any of the participating broadcasters, and I'll give John's a plug, rte.ie/news, and you can go try it out for yourself. But John, this is a project where technology is meeting journalism. The technology bit of it is hugely important. And as we talk about the pressures that journalists are under, we've already mentioned about getting creative to try and, and those precious resources that everybody has. How is that working for you?
Well, you heard the statistic there. There are 40,000 journalists who work for organizations that are affiliated with the EBU. I employ 350 of them. If I can harness the 39,650 others to, I think that's about right, to actually leverage content for RTE, that sounds like a good deal for me. And as I say, this is all about fact-based journalism and trying to make sure that we give it the best platform possible, because that truly is the best antidote to disinformation and also to ensure continued press freedom. And as we were saying earlier on, it is the foundation of democracy. And only by actually working together can we actually deliver that. So it's a terrific initiative, and I'm incredibly proud that RTE and the EBU are at the heart of it.
Thank you, John. And we started this session by hearing from Kyiv in Ukraine, and I just think all of our thoughts are there at the moment, also with all the other journalists we've seen. But Angelina, you wanted to come back at the end and tell us a little bit more about what's happening in your country and what's so important to you. So the last word goes to you.
Thank you, Liz. I wanted to summarize and also get back to several points about Ukraine. So getting back to your question about public journalism, which is incredibly important at any stage, but at this stage globally, as public trust towards any institution, including media as an institution, declines, is for all of us, think jointly on how we get back that trust, how we engage our audiences. This is one point. The second point is incredibly and critically important role of regional journalism. I started with, and our video actually demonstrated footage from all across the country. These are the smaller teams operating across the whole country. So for those who want to support journalism, for those who want to develop journalism, focus on regional journalism, focus on smaller independent media who will probably in critical situation have a bigger chance to survive, a bigger chance to operate, adjust to critical situations, be it political pressure or a war, like in our case. This is, I think, a very important point to make. But let me also touch upon several things which I really wanted to voice in terms of what probably foreign media could also have a perspective on. From what we've seen compared to how the global coverage of Ukraine used to look like in 2014, now the world seems to understand Ukraine better, to know everything about Ukraine better, to know the geography, to know the society and other things. But what we miss as journalists, and in terms of local journalism, regional journalism, and also global journalism, it means demonstrating and telling stories of interconnectedness and interdependentness, right? How, I don't know, processes in healthcare, processes in education, science, and policies across the whole world are connected and interdependent. It is really, really important to give more context. The war in Ukraine didn't start on February 24th, and it didn't actually start in 2014. It's a long pattern of Russian imperial pressure. I don't want to give any historical lectures, but really without this context, it's really impossible to give a proper coverage to any war, to any conflict. Be it Ukraine, be it the Middle East or any other countries. I think it's our responsibility. It's the responsibility of media to go, beyond the story, give more context, and take a closer look to different parts of the world, and also mind the wording. I think it is very important for all of us what words we're using. For Ukrainians, it's not a civil war. It's not a war in Ukraine. It's an invasion of Russia into Ukraine, and it's very, very critically important for many, many Ukrainians. You've probably seen lots of challenges and initiatives across all the possible social media by Ukrainians, because it's something that defines what really happens in Ukraine. I'll stop. I know we're running out of time. Thank you.
I think everybody will forgive us, Angelina, for giving you a few more minutes, and we wish you and all of the teams the very best from everybody all around the world that's watching this. I'm sure their thoughts are with you. Thank you very much, and thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to Yolanda, John, Ging, and Oswaldo. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you everybody for watching.
Well, thank you, Liz. I would like to say that our hearts are with the people of Ukraine, especially the journalists who are working from the battlefield. Our hearts, our effort with all of you.
Thank you.